Okay, as Lois said, our story starts in Germany, not in the present-day Poland, where so many Australian Lutheran stories start, but over the other side of the country in Westphalia. It's a small Catholic village called Bellersen. Down the bottom there you can see, when Tim gets the pointer ready. Yep. It's, as I said, a Catholic village in the region of Brakel. It's about 250 kilometres south of Hamburg via Hanover. Another town that we'll be talking about later on is Paderborn, which is about 50 kilometres away from Bellersen, and we'll explain the connection a bit later on. One thing that I must correct in the advertisement for tonight, I said that Friedrich left from Hamburg, but in fact he left from Bremen, which is also indicated on the slide there. As you can see, it's a very pretty village, very prosperous these days. There's about 700 people living there, and they get on very well. I visited there a number of times, which we'll talk about later. But the village has a certain notoriety in Germany, because it was the setting of a novel, the Judenbücher, which translates to the Jews' beach. Now, that's the tree, not an exclusive bathing region for Jews. The book was written by Annette von Droste-Hulshoff, and it was published in 1842. In the book, the village is identified only as Dorf Bay. And you can see this is a sign outside the town commemorating the book. The novel is based on a real-life 18th century report about a murdered Jew, but the book gives no definitive answer as to what actually happened. Incidentally, the author is a niece of the Baron von Huxthausen, and we'll hear about him a bit later on. In the centre of the town is the Catholic Church, dedicated to St. Manolfus, who was the saint who originally brought the gospel to the area. Stained glass windows on either side of the altar depict St. Paul and St. Peter, and the remaining 8 windows show significant events in the life of St. Manolfus. Many of the items in the church, including the baptismal font, which we can see here, date back to the early 1600s. And we are sure that most of our Temme forebears in Germany and some of our Temme relations currently were actually baptised in that particular font. Although Bellersen is a very pleasant place today, back at the beginning of the 1800s it was a very different story. The von Huxthausen family had bought the village in 1480 and controlled it till the end of World War I. For much of the 16th century, though, Bellersen was actually a Lutheran village. In 1794, 65 houses in the village burnt down, which meant a large rebuilding program had to be undertaken. Luckily, fire insurance had been founded 25 years previously, and the insurance officer's assessment of the damage amounted to 4,906 thaler and 24 groschen. I have no idea what that translates to in today's money, but I can assure you it's probably quite a lot. Many of the houses in the village still show an inscription, like you can see here, which explains about the fire and the rebuilding activity, who was the person who rebuilt it, etc. The next half century in Bellersen was a period of political and financial instability. In 1802, Bellersen came under the control of Prussia, and by 1807 it was actually part of Napoleon's French kingdom of Westphalia. It was ruled by Napoleon's brother Jerome. After Napoleon's defeat, it became part of Prussia again. Germany was late in abandoning feudalism, so the villagers had to rent their land from Baron von Huxthausen. During this time, the village was subject to many years of starvation caused by floods, wild winds, drought, a mouse plague, potato disease and insufferable taxes. In 1826, almost the whole town was prosecuted by Baron August von Huxthausen, this gentleman here, for the payment of back taxes. Many villagers had their possessions seized and sold in a bankruptcy sale, which of course would not make their life any easier. Huxhausen himself was quite famous. He was an agricultural scientist, an economist, lawyer, writer and collector of folk songs and fairy tales, a passion he shared with his close friends, the Grimm brothers. He is best known, however, for his account of conditions in Russia, as revealed by his visit there in 1843. This was a visit sponsored by the German government to find out what conditions were like in Russia and to try to improve the lot over there. Now, it's time now to introduce a Temme family member. Not my great-grandfather Friedrich, but his brother Heinrich. The Government Gazette of November 1826 reports that Heinrich fell upon, bashed and robbed the Baron. He was arrested and taken to the jail in Brakel, but managed to escape and disappear. It is likely that he was secretly admired by the villagers and perhaps had assistance in his escape. We have no idea where he went, but we are sure he's not buried in Bellersen. We have a description of him from the arrest warrant, which among other things describes him as 20 years old, 5 foot 6 inches tall, dark brown hair, and here I need some help from Tim, a typical Temme nose, fairly big and long. The arrest warrant didn't say the words typical Temme.
But here's the problem. Just have a look at the gonk on this fellow's face.
Okay, so this was the situation that Friedrich Wilhelm Temme found himself in 1845. Before we leave Germany, here is a summary of the male members of the Temme family tree as far as we have been able to establish it. Dietrich Temmen, this guy here, is the first definitely established ancestor of ours. And he became a citizen of the Bellersen district in 1658. Becoming a citizen in those days, among other things, involved donating a leather bucket to the village for firefighting purposes. Obviously not all that good since the village burnt down, but anyway. We do know Dietrich's father and mother's names, but we do not know any other information about them. So either of those two Johann Temmes could be his father, or maybe there's somebody else. The other Temme names associated with the district are listed alongside the dates that they became citizens of the district. So we managed to go back to Hans Temmen von Geerden in 1568. He's the first Temme that we've found in the records of the area. We think they're related, but we're really not sure. The other names on that list were listed in birth date order rather than citizenship date. Okay, Friedrich was baptised in the Bellersen church on the 9th of July 1918, but here you can see what makes history research or family history research quite difficult occasionally. You'll notice that his name has been recorded as Franz Wilhelm. That's the only time he's recorded as Franz. Everywhere else he's known as Friedrich. And not only that, of course, when they produced the official record from the church records, they said his name was Franz as well. You'll see here his mother and father. His mother was described as an Ackersman, which is a farmer. And his mother was a Gropper, a Miss Gropper. And one of the godparents was the Secretary Franz Gropper, Wilhelm Temme, an uncle, I think. And we have no idea who the Jungfrau is. Okay. In the 1840s, the effects of the Industrial Revolution were beginning to bite. Potato blight caused food shortages throughout Europe, and as the second surviving son in the family, Wilhelm's outlook was pretty bleak. So, on the 11th of October 1845, as an unmarried 27-year-old, he boarded the George Washington in Bremen, bound for Adelaide, Australia. 6 days later, his father died, and his mother died on the 11th of January 1846 while he was still in transit. The George Washington arrived in Adelaide on the 22nd of January 1846. Incidentally, it also carried a number of Lutherans, and I've just picked out a few names here. One was Friedrich Borgelt, who was ordained as the pastor of the Clemsig congregation in 1848, Matthias Lange, a founding member of Tabor congregation in Tanunda, and Johann Maschmidt, who served as a pastor at St Stephen's from 1857 to 1891. Now the question arises is, did Friedrich, as a Catholic, have anything to do with the Lutheran immigrants on the ship? Or perhaps more correctly, did any of the Lutheran immigrants on the ship have anything to do with Friedrich, a Catholic? Quite possibly it happened, but we just don't know. Early arrivals in Adelaide were later feted by the South Australian populace. It was a matter of pride if you could count your ancestors as founders, those who arrived before the proclamation on the 28th of December 1836. You were a pioneer if you got there before 1841, or you were an old colonist if you managed to get there before the gold rush. So we can claim Friedrich as an old colonist. Incidentally, keeping that status up apparently became quite onerous for those people because they were expected to provide all sorts of entertainments and things like that. So it became a little bit of a financial burden to be feted by the populace. Okay, going back to Friedrich. We don't know much about his early years in the colony, but he probably worked around Adelaide because in May 1848 we know he lived in Kensington. It was then that he became naturalised, and this enabled him to purchase land. He became active in real estate, and we have records of 25 of his transactions to at least 1882. He must have had a keen eye for a bargain, for as far as we can tell, all his transactions resulted in a profit, except for the land that he sold to his brother-in-law, Julius Weil. I can assure you that that Temme gene has definitely not been passed down to at least this member of the family. He owned land in Gawler and may have lived there in 1849. On the 5th of February 1849 he bought 80 acres in Gawler for just 10 shillings and sold it later that year, coincidentally to Richard Schomburg, who was mentioned earlier, for £460. Friedrich met Augusta Ottilie Sophie Helscher when she was a maidservant working for Mrs. J.J.W. Anderson in Union Street, Adelaide. Augusta would have been a valued member of the colony because in 1854 a landowner's wife wrote, "A great number of families are leaving here because they cannot get a female servant." Auntie Jo Schroeder, Friedrich's daughter, confided to my brother Colin in the 1940s that Mrs. Anderson was in love with Friedrich and treated him with special favours like serving him coffee with milk and cream while Augusta had to make do with watered down coffee. Emily Apple, another daughter of Friedrich, recorded in her diary on the 17th of January 1905, "Papers said Mrs. Anderson died in Germany. I wonder, did she leave us anything?" Seems like there may have been a continuing relationship somewhere along the line. On the 19th of February, we read, "Letter from Emma tells us that Mrs. Anderson left £41,000 but did not keep her promise to leave us anything. Perhaps it's just as well this way." £41,000 in 1905 is approximately $5 million today. On the 15th of October, however, we read, "Have just got the news that I can fetch my inheritance from Mrs. Anderson at any time. May God bless it in our hands so that we make the best use of it." Emily eventually received £139.17 and 8pence, worth over $15,000 today. Some of the money was used to buy a tombstone for Augusta's grave. Johanna, that's Auntie Jo that was mentioned earlier, also received some money, maybe the same amount, we don't know. Okay, on the 15th of August 1850, aged 32, Friedrich married Augusta in St Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Grenfell Street. The ceremony was performed by Pastor A. Kappler, and according to the marriage certificate, according to the rites and ceremonies of the Lutheran Church. Augusta was one of 10 children from a staunch Lutheran family. Her father, a pastor, held an official position, possibly court chaplain, in the German Lutheran Church. After the death of her parents, she accompanied a brother and sister to Australia, arriving in 1849. The Helscher family came from Paderborn, which we mentioned earlier, about 50 kilometres away from Bellersen, but we don't believe that Friedrich and Augusta had met before they came all the way around the world to Australia. In 1850, Friedrich was in Adelaide working as a waterman or a water carrier. This was an important occupation in Adelaide before reticulation was installed in 1856. In 1850, the population of Adelaide was 11,000 and there were 4,000 houses. The water was drawn from the River Torrens, which we see here, in barrels carried on carts, and records show that each day about 175,500 litres was drawn from the river. In summer, the Torrens was a series of stagnant and polluted pools, so the water was hardly fit for drinking, despite being filtered through sponges. At night, the water carriers had to keep their barrels full as a firefighting emergency measure. George Fife Angus' painting of the Torrens in 1846, which we had on the previous slide, contrasts sharply with this picture of the Torrens in about 1850 in summer. You can see the stagnant and polluted pools. You also see a few horses and carts in the river there. In April 1850, the water carriers threatened to strike because the place that they used to take their carts down to get the water from was blocked off by the rebuilding of the ford across the Torrens to North Adelaide. There was no other suitable place to get water from, and the authorities were unsympathetic to the water carriers. So there was a demonstration in King William Street which attracted a huge crowd, most of whom were sympathetic to the water carriers' cause. The deputation was sent to the Governor, Sir Henry Young, who referred it to the Colonial Secretary, Charles Sturt. But as he could do nothing, the crowd marched on the Governor and booed him loudly, which brought about the restoration of the water supply, thereby averting the strike. Another problem the water carriers faced was the dray tax, which was introduced to improve the roads. You might think our roads today are not all that wonderful. However, in 1849, a bullock actually drowned in Wakefield Street. And a reveller was fined for attempting to swim the length of Hindley Street. The tax was imposed on drays and carts based on the width of tyres. Needless to say, it was extremely unpopular, especially amongst the poor, and was eventually abandoned and the tax money was refunded. Okay, Friedrich and Augusta probably lived in the city for the first 5 years of their marriage, as he bought a property on the corner of Angus and Regent Streets the day after his marriage. According to his advertiser obituary in 1894, he went to the Victorian goldfields in about 1852. Their last born, Wilhelmine, was born in 1870, so they were probably grandparents already when this photo was taken. In 1853, Friedrich purchased 40 acres in Springbank, and after selling 10 acres to Julius Weil, his brother-in-law, he purchased another 15 acres in 1858, so finished up with 45 acres. And I've managed to work out approximately where the farm was. The red lines outline what eventually finished up as Friedrich's farm, and the blue lines there indicate the 10 acres approximately that he sold to Julius Weil. This is Goodwood Road down here, and you can see Springbank Road on the other side there. So a fair chunk of the suburb of Panorama was owned by Friedrich and Augusta. He moved to the Springbank property sometime in 1855 and lived there for the rest of his life. In 1870, Julius Weil, Augusta's sister's husband, and therefore Friedrich's brother-in-law, bought a quarry on 18 acres in West Mitcham, just off Belair Road as it climbs the hill towards Windy Point. We can see here the house of my grandfather, which was built on part of that 18 acres. The quarry extends back behind there, and we'll talk about that later on. Julius and Friedrich worked the quarry until Julius sold it to Friedrich 2 years later in 1872, when Friedrich and his son Wilhelm, my grandfather, worked it. This slide, as I said, shows Wilhelm's home near the quarry. Wilhelm retired in 1930 and the quarry was sold in 1937. The quarry was the source of high quality bluestone suitable for building purposes, and the reason for the reference to bluestone in the title of tonight's talk. Let's just have a quick look at Friedrich's brother-in-law, Johann Matthias Julius Theodor Weil, who was born in Altona, Germany, died at Springbank in January 1881. His wife, Augusta's sister, was born at Paderborn and died in 1895. And Julius was a trustee of the Bethlehem Lutheran Church, originally in Light Square, but then when they built the church across the way, he was a prominent elder there, trustee there, and also a prominent elder. Okay, when Julius Weil bought the quarry in 1870, Hindley Street in the city looked like this. We can't see any bluestone buildings, so... Okay, little is known about Augusta and Wilhelm's, Friedrich's early religious affiliations, but in 1862 they joined Bethlehem Lutheran Church, Light Square, which you can see here. The congregation worshipped in this little church they had purchased in Weymouth Street. In 1866 it was decided to erect a larger church, the present Bethlehem Church, in Flinders Street. In 1881, Wilhelm Hermann, Friedrich's fourth child and my grandfather, built his house on the West Mitcham property of 18 acres that included the quarry when he married Anna Bertha Theresa Schmidt. Their house was named Wilhelmshöhe, and the cellar under the house was used as the storage location for the gunpowder that was used in the quarry. Perhaps health and safety might have something to say about that. Wilhelm had started working in his father's quarry on his 15th birthday in 1870, and he worked there for 50 years until his retirement. In the early 1890s, the road to Windy Point was built passing the front of their house, and the railway line to Belair had been built in 1883 and passed between his house and his father's house. Wilhelmshöhe subsequently became the Dogs Rescue Home in Mitcham, which some of you may remember. I certainly do. So, apart from 50 years hard work in the quarry, what did Wilhelm do in his spare time? Wilhelm and Anna went on to produce 16 children, 8 boys and 8 girls, all of whom were born at Wilhelmshöhe. 3 infants died, one of whooping cough, the others of diphtheria. Pictured here around 1915 are Wilhelm and Anna with their 13 surviving children. This picture is my passport to tonight's presentation. Circled in red is my father, Gerhard Karl Temme, known by all as George, and the twin brother of Frieda, that girl there, and he was number 11 in the family. Okay, back to Friedrich. The Temme family on their farm was industrious and frugal, highlighted in Emily's diary, which I quoted from earlier, by descriptions of the tasks the children had to perform, as well as having to carry vines to the house, gather thistles for the pigs, rake and plant, pick peas and other tasks, and here I quote, they had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to look for snails with a lantern, for which we got a penny 1,000. And that money had to be used to buy Sunday shoes, gloves and other small items. Sometimes Mother would think our count had not been too accurate and we would have to count the snails again. The people in this picture at the farm are from left Wilhelmine, Emma, Friedrich with grandchildren, Johanna and Augusta. Okay, back to Bethlehem Lutheran Church. It was built of stone from Friedrich's quarry and was dedicated on the 23rd of June 1872. Many other buildings in Adelaide and suburbs contain stone from the Temme quarry, although it may not always be acknowledged. It seems that any stone quarried from the southern hills had become known as Glen Osmond stone. This resulted in an indignant letter from Friedrich to the Adelaide newspaper The Register in 1877 correcting this assumption. And he lists quite a few buildings, but among the buildings which are of West Mitcham stone, he mentions Messrs Bigford and Sons premises, Mr Cawthorne's, the King's Head Hotel in King William Street and the Glenelg Institute. Some of those buildings you can still see in Adelaide. Friedrich died on the 10th of March 1894, aged 76, and is buried in West Temme Cemetery. The home was sold to his widow, and his widow moved to Melbourne to live with her son Carl. Her two unmarried daughters, Emma and Wilhelmine, moved with her. On the 9th of April 1904, she celebrated her 80th birthday at Wilhelmshöhe. This is a picture of that celebration. At one point, according to Emily's diary, Mama arose and recited Wie groß ist des allmächtigen Güte, and went through the long hymn with its many verses. I've actually counted the hymn. There are only 6 verses, but they each have 8 lines, so it was quite a long hymn, without a mistake. There were 57 guests at one sitting. 38 people had slept at the Temme house on Saturday night. Augusta died 6 months later and is buried alongside her husband. Here's the Bethlehem Church, pictured in 1889. 3 people are standing in front of a sign which says Martin Luther School. The school was built at the rear of the church in 1884 with stone from the quarry donated by the Temmes. And if it wasn't dark outside and you turned around and looked out the windows, you would actually see the front of the school building made out of Temme stone. And here's a photo of the students at the Martin Luther School in about 1910. We're assured that they were a happy lot, but perhaps smiling was forbidden.
Move over, John. You've had enough. It's my turn. Now, your father might be the centre of the red bullseye in this picture, but the beautiful woman with the gold halo above her head is my grandmother. John's father and my grandmother. Actually, I think John's over 100 years old and he's just lost count of his birthdays. So getting back to Martin Luther School, I won't elaborate on the fact that 9 Temmes and 7 Fishers were students at the school, nor that Edmund Fisher, my great-grandfather, and Emil Fisher, my grandfather, were both students at the school, with the latter sharing a class with Hans Heissen. It's easy to get lost in people, and I just wanted to recap the dates and remind you a little bit of the history. FWT, Friedrich Wilhelm Temme, migrated from Bellersen to Adelaide in 1846. He married Augusta in 1850, initially worked as a water carter, and then speculated in property. He got involved in the quarry 20 years later in 1870. In 1871, Bethlehem Church building started, and 13 years later, 1884, the Martin Luther School out the back here was built. So Friedrich and Augusta had 11 children, you remember? 8 of whom survived infancy, and 6 of whom went off to produce offspring. And John and I are interested in the 4th born. In 1855, that Randy Wilhelm Herman, John's grandfather and my great-grandfather. So Wilhelm and Anna had 16 children, as we pointed out, of which 13 survived. All were staunch members of Bethlehem Lutheran Church. So, just over 30 years ago, in 1986 to be precise, according to the book From Bellersen to Bluestone, There were 1,288 descendants of Friedrich Wilhelm Temme and Augusta. 943 of those were direct blood relatives and 349 marriage partners. There are 398 different surnames in the supplement published by John and Colin in 1994. The Temme impact on the Lutheran Church in Australia has been considerable. By 1986, no less than 22 direct descendants had graduated as pastors, and 9 pastors had married into the family. In addition, there are teachers in Lutheran schools, and the numbers of elders, chairmen, treasurers and the like can only be guessed at. Now, these are just a few of those 1,288 Temme descendants pictured at the 1986 reunion, and at least here they all have smiles on their faces. Now, this is a Temme talk, and I'm not going to start on the Fischer Stammbaum, or more correctly Stammbäume, as this is just my German lot from the early 1600s. I'll just focus on this bit of my tree, and if you see under the entry for my great-great-grandfather, it says, if I can read it, um 1850 mit Familie nach Australien ausgewandert. Paul Gerhard Eusebius Fischer, around 1850, migrated with his family to Australia. In 1999, when we received a copy of this big German family tree, there were no entries listed for the descendants of my great-great-grandfather, Paul Gerhard Eusebius Fischer. So we were quick to take back to Germany these 2 family history books of the Fischer family, which trace the origins of the offspring, of the 2 sons of Paul Gerhard Eusebius Fischer to help complete the Fischer family tree. So it was one of the grandsons of Paul Gerhard Eusebius Fischer who married my grandmother Fischer, born Temme, Anna Temme. Now, I'd just like to go back to this photo again with the bullseye and the beautiful halo, which tells you, just to tell you some of the more noteworthy accomplishments of this truly remarkable family. So this next slide is pretty busy, so I'll have to read from it. And I might need to come around here, so you don't need to see the screen. Okay, so the firstborn, Karl Friedrich Wilhelm, was the only one of the family who was educated at Prince Alfred College. He was a glass worker and an artist, and like his father, a seal holder here of Bethlehem Lutheran Church. The thirdborn, halo-wearing Anna Maria Louise, my grandmother, married Emil Fischer in Bethlehem Lutheran Church here. She had a trained singing voice, and both she and her husband sang in the choir. Emil was also a seal holder and treasurer of Bethlehem Lutheran Church. The fifthborn, Anna Bertha Augusta, was also a choir member. She married Pastor Theodore Lutzi in Bethlehem Lutheran Church and served at his side in parishes in Queensland, South Australia and Victoria. Ninthborn, Os Temme, was a land salesman, broker, valuer and justice of the peace. He was very involved in Lutheran Church affairs, first at Bethlehem Lutheran Church and then at Unley, where he was instrumental in starting the first congregation there. He was on the board of directors of Lutheran Publishing House for 29 years. He was largely responsible for the acquisition of the church offices and bookshop at 70 Perry Street and later at Gore Place in Adelaide, which many of you will remember. Number 11, the 11th born, and one of the twins, George, was a carpenter. And we all know, if you've been awake and remembering, that's John's father. After years at Bethlehem Lutheran Church, he became a foundation member at Kernelight Gardens Church, which is now Pasadena. In that church, he was on the building committee and served as an elder and treasurer of the congregation and played a large part in all the carpentry building of that church, much of which was done with voluntary work. 13th born, Herman Edgar became the first Bethlehem member to be baptised, confirmed, schooled and ordained as a pastor in Bethlehem Lutheran Church. He served parishes in Queensland, then became the principal of Concordia Toowoomba for 12 years. He was Vice President of the Queensland District for 23 years and member of the Queensland District Council for 25 years. Of his 5 children, the third, Hubert, also became a Lutheran pastor. One of Herman's grandsons is Warren Truss, a member of the Australian Parliament since 1990 and a former leader of the National Party of Australia. and much better behaved for Australia. 14th born Doris Hilda was baptised, confirmed, schooled and married in Bethel Lutheran Church. She served with her husband, Pastor Theodore Nusky, initially at Hopetoun, Victoria, and then in Queensland. 16th born Ben Temme was baptised, confirmed and schooled at Bethlehem and went on to attain degrees in commerce and became a member of 3 chartered institutes, something that's quite rare apparently, the chartered accountant, auditor and secretary. So he was a treasurer of Bethel Lutheran Church for 25 years and also treasurer of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Australia for many years. Good. Okay, so the next slide shows an interesting connection between the Temmes mentioned on the previous slide. It's a postcard to Ben Temme, remember he was number 16 down the bottom, with the old penny red stamp, postmarked Nobby in Queensland, which we reckon is about 1920 this postcard dates from. It's just addressed Wilhelmshöhe, Lower Mitcham, so the house must have been well known. The senders are the 5th born, Anna and Theodore Lutzi, who I mentioned was a pastor in the Queensland district. And oh, how I admire those people who can read that impossible German script. So there's another connection to the remarkable family. Bethlehem Church next door has a star window above the entrance door. It's a bit hard to photograph. From the inside it looks like this. And on the next slide you can see the write-up in the centenary book for Bethel Lutheran Church describing this star window, which mentions it's the Star of the Epiphany, which led the wise men to Bethlehem, hence the association with the name of the congregation. The outer segments feature 6 significant dates relating to the church itself, the formation of the congregation, foundation stone, dedication and centenary of those things. And also just mentioning in 65 the declaration of altar and pulpit fellowship between the UELCA and the ELCA. And what's the connection with this? Okay. Gordon Temme was one of the Windows donors. Gordon being the first of the 6 children of George the Carpenter, and John being the 6th born of that family. George the Carpenter being the 11th born of the remarkable family. In Bellersen's Bulmai Park, right next to the old Temme house, there is a stone cross, which according to an inscription carved into the base was erected in 1811 by Benedictus Temme and D.H. Schmidt. For a while it was assumed that this Benedictus was FWT's brother, but he would have only been 8 years old at the time, so this is unlikely. A Benedictus Temme was a witness to his baptism, so this person may have been responsible for the cross. We think he may have been a cousin, or more likely an uncle of Friedrich Wilhelm Temme. And here the crosses appeared in 1993 in wintertime when one of John's 5, I think, visits to Bellersen. Yep. Over the years, the inscription was worn away to be almost illegible, so we decided to have a bronze plaque made to preserve the information. So in 2015, Bellersen celebrated its 1000th birthday, based on the first mention in an official document in 1015. The town was then known as Baldershusen. John corresponded with Horst Dieter Kruse, who we'll show you a picture of later, and he cleared it with the town authorities to accept the plaque during the birthday celebrations. So Tim and Gay, that's me, and my wife Gay, Karen and John and their daughter Karina arrived in Bellersen in August 2015 to make the presentation. On Saturday the 22nd we were guests of honour. We sat in the only row in the village hall that had padded seats at the official birthday commemoration. There were several speeches and a few musical item numbers by adults and children from the school, all in German, except of course for our introduction when we had to stand up so the crowd could see us. So after some refreshments, everyone set off behind the town band, passing Manolfus Church to unveil the stone commemorating Bellersen's 1000 years.
That's just to wake up any of you who might be having a go now.
Stay awake, there's a bit more coming.
That's the stone commemorating the 1,000-year anniversary.
And the procession then proceeded past the Temme house towards Volmar Park.
This is the Temme house here.
They don't all normally walk like that. So John just pointed out the cross there, hiding in the shadows. Temme house is just behind us, here, behind the focal point. Okay. John and I put a lot of thought into the wording of the plaque and getting approval from the Bellersen authorities, and it was made here and we brought it to Bellersen for mounting on the Temme cross. A proud moment for both of us on dedication day, with the plaque now attached to the front of the cross. Translated, the plaque reads, "The cross was donated by the Temme family in 1811. This plaque was given to the Bellersen village for its 1,000-year jubilee by the descendants of Friedrich Wilhelm Temme, who migrated to Australia in 1845, August 2015. So we were fated, and here I am shaking hands with the local mayor. He is, of course, a burgomaster. Anyone know him or guess what his name might be?
Temme.
It was Herman Temme. So the information about the Temme family we have presented comes mainly from the two books, From Bellersen to Bluestone, and the supplement. John's brother Colin researched the history during a trip to Germany in 1974, and much further information has come from Horst Dieter Kruse, pictured here, who had a lifelong interest in the history of the Brakel-Bellersen area. He's written a number of books and papers about the area, ranging from an examination thesis to co-author the book 975 Jahre Bellersen, 1990, and Nachrichten aus Bay, Kleine Chronik des Dorfes Bellersen, which runs to about 800 pages, not all that kleiner. So now to the Temme Quarry. I reckon all of you would have driven up or down Belair Road at some time in your lives. As you turn the sharp corner at the bottom of the climb on the way up, there's a turn off the left named John Fisher Drive. They didn't get the spelling quite right, but it's pretty close. And at the end of that street, there is the old Temme Quarry. A couple more shots of the quarry face here. Now, through the trees here, you get a glimpse of Adelaide Airport buildings. And if you really crane your neck, maybe walk over a bit closer to the trees, you might also see where Outer Harbour is. Right over there. Oh yeah, there it is. The Port River, inside the Outer Harbour breakwater by the ocean terminal. The sailing ship, one and all, yachts, and the breakwater in the background. The significance? Some of the stone in the breakwater came from the Temme Quarry. I got a big surprise a couple of weeks ago to see the Temme Quarry is up for sale. Not sure what we'd do with it, but John and I badly want to buy it. Maybe we'll pass the hat around later and see if we can collect enough tonight.
You better have a pretty big hat, Tim, because they want over $1 million for it.
Okay, now to the grave of Friedrich Wilhelm Temme and his wife and daughter. FWT was buried in West Terrace Cemetery in 1894, as we've mentioned, Augusta, his wife, in 1904, and their invalid daughter Wilhelmina 4 years before her mother at the age of 30. We didn't mention before that the cause of Wilhelmina's debility was the result of one of her brothers dropping her down the cellar stairs. My summary from this would be that she was a paraplegic. So Friedrich Wilhelm Temme, here's the inscriptions on the grave, born 1818, died 1894. Augusta Temme, born 1824, died 1904. Wilhelmina Temme, born 1870, died 1900. So, a final piece of Temme memorabilia is the coat of arms. We have no idea if it's connected with our Temme family, but it looks good, so we've adopted it. It came to us by way of John's brother Gordon, who received a photo of it in 1959 from Vera Temme, a German woman, who worked at the Australian Embassy Migration Office in Cologne, in Germany, and had come across Gordon's name on a driver's licence renewal form because at that stage he was the registrar of motor vehicles in Canberra, so he signed everyone's licence, I presume. Anyhow, she had contacted him to see if she could establish some connection with the Temme family, but sadly they didn't make one. Okay, so I hope you'd enjoyed our little presentation here tonight. John has been responsible for collecting most of the Temme history, while I've delved into the past connections of the Fisher and Temme ancestors and Bethlehem Church, which resulted in finding some connections to my church with over 60 of them. They have been reported in Bethlehem's News for the Pews, our congregational newspaper, in a series of articles. I have a few reprints there, but if you would like me to email you a copy of those 5 articles, if you'd write your email address on that little book I've got on the front table there, I'll get to sending them to you. So, nobody knows if we've done a good presentation tonight. I don't know, but Temme knows.
I'd just like to finish off with a bit about the Temme coat of arms. We've been told, I have no idea where this description comes from, but it's like the coat of arms itself, it sounds good, so we'll take it. The knight with his shield is the central motif, and it represents the individual's lifelong pursuit of virtue and war against evil. The colour sable, or black, symbolises serenity, and the colour silver denotes nobility and is associated with the qualities of purity and chastity. The wings are symbolic of power and speed, and the crown represents loyalty and regal favour. The slashes and tears in the decorative mantle represent scars in the battle of life. The upper rose is God's love transcending all of life, and the central rose is the purity of the individual's heart. And there's a quote here, "Under God, resist evil and pursue virtue." So, we hope that you have enjoyed our little tour through the Temme history. Like any good tour, we're going to finish up in the souvenir shop. There are a few copies of from Bellersen to Bluestone, which Rachel mentioned earlier on. And there are also a few glasses from the original reunion in 1986 with the Temme crest on. If you would like one or more of those, then a tax-deductible donation to the Lutheran Archives will be sufficient for you to obtain that. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions there anybody has? Yes?
What relation are John and Tim to each other?
Right, we're first cousins. Yeah, once removed.
He's the removed one.
No.
Okay, Naomi.
Are there still Temmes living in the Temme house? And what's the difference between Temme and Temmen? Is that a plural?
In ancient times, to answer your second question first, in ancient times the recording of names was very much a matter for the individual. Hence you get names like Franz instead of Friedrich, Temmen instead of Temme, and various other variations of names. I'm not sure whether Temmen was the original name and the N got lost, or whether someone decided to add an N for some strange reason at some stage. But yeah, basically they're the same name.
What does it mean?
And, sorry?
What does it mean?
We're not sure, but there is some evidence that perhaps it is a form of the name Dietrich, although Horst, when I mentioned this to him, thought that was unlikely. As he's a German and does research in this sort of area, I guess I'll go with him. So we really don't know what it means. Your first question, which I've forgotten.
The house. The Temmes.
Oh, the Temme house. No, the people living in it at the moment are not Temmes. soon after Friedrich left Bellersen, it moved out of the Temme household. It went to people called Buckhouse, and for a long time it was known as the Buckhouse house. But it's now owned by somebody else who we have met and whose name I cannot remember. Tim? No? No.
I was there 2 years ago, and when I asked about it, the lady down the road said, "Oh yes, that's the Temme house right there." So they still refer to it.
Yeah. Maybe since we've sort of
Yes, it was
stirred up the interest in the Temmes in the village. Yeah.
Okay, now there was a question of his.
No, it's been answered, thank you.
Oh, it's been answered. Oh, that's right. Any other questions? Really must have done a good job.
We must have.
Graham Austin.
Just a very aside one, the first Bethlehem Lutheran Church, is that demolished or what's happened to that? Do we know? Light Square?
No, that one's John Jump Shop, still, you can see this one's
So the building still
still
stands?
there.
I think so, yes. Yeah, I think the front has been altered fairly significantly.
So you can see.
Wayman Street and Light Square.
A little bit information on that early church. Unfortunately, that is not a fresh photo of the church. The original church was demolished in about 1882, and that building which appeared on the photo there was a subsequent building.
Oh, is that right? Okay. I wasn't aware of that.
Okay, probably a more detailed history best on some of them explain that.
Of the church.
Okay, any other questions? If not, I'll invite Lyle to Rose later. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you to you, John and Tim, for this lively and very informative presentation. I've known of your family history book for some time. I've seen many copies of it at the archives over my years associated there, but I've never really delved into it. I hadn't had any reason to or time to do so. So it was nice tonight to have the story told by both of you and to hear it from your mouths. As Lover said at the beginning, it's a rather special family, isn't it, that you can go back to Germany and revisit the village that your ancestors came from and even be shown the house that they lived in. It certainly, as Lover said, it certainly doesn't happen for many of us who came from the eastern side of the old Germany. So thank you for introducing us to this village and this story too. I guess over the years, as I've driven up the Lear Road, I can recall being told, I don't know by whom, about the Temme house and the quarry, Temme quarry up there. I've known of that. But it was good that you had some nice photos today to actually show it to us. So I appreciated that, and maybe when I go up that way I'll look out for this Fisher Street or Fisher Road or whatever it is and do a John Fisher, that's right, thank you, and do a detour and have a closer look at it next time. So let's express our thanks to these two